Something about you has changed. You feel it in the pauses between conversations, in the way rooms go slightly quieter when you walk in. You're not louder, not sharper, just different. Your energy is heavier now, more deliberate. You don't rush to fill silence. You don't scramble to explain yourself. And somehow that unsettles them. They can feel something changing. You're not reacting the way you used to. No defensive speeches, no emotional paragraphs, no urgent need to correct misunderstandings. You listen, you observe, you let people reveal themselves. That restraint wasn't there before. They expected the old version of you, expressive, reactive, easy to read. Instead, they're met with composure, with distance, with something they can't quite decode. This isn't anger, it's evolution. Something inside you closed, the part that begged to be understood, the part that overextended for validation. And in its place, something stronger opened, quieter, more controlled, more aware. You're not becoming colder, you're becoming intentional. And whether they admit it or not, they know it. That's what makes them uneasy. They thought you'd spiral after betrayal, after the disrespect, after the quiet emotional abandonment disguised as misunderstanding. They assumed you would unravel the way you used to, publicly, passionately, visibly wounded, because that version of you was easier to manage, easy to predict, easy to dismiss. They thought silence meant weakness. They thought if they withdrew approval, affection, or acknowledgement, you would chase it, that you would over-explain, over-apologize, overcompensate. They were waiting for your collapse because it confirmed their narrative about you. Too emotional, too intense, too sensitive to survive without them. But you didn't break. You felt it, yes. The sting of being underestimated, the quiet humiliation of realizing who never truly valued you, the anger that rose in your chest at 2 a.m. when everything replayed in your mind. You felt all of it. You just didn't perform it. The old you would have reacted instantly. Long messages, heated confrontations, emotional transparency poured into the wrong hands. The old you needed to be understood, the new you observes. Instead of exploding, you withdrew strategically. You studied the pattern. You let the silence stretch. You watched who reached out and who didn't, who cared and who only cared when you were entertaining. And in that stillness, something became painfully clear. When you stopped performing, you saw who they really were. The real battle was never out there. It was inside you. It was the urge to text back when your fingers hovered over the screen at midnight. The need to explain your side one more time. The impulse to defend your name, to correct the narrative, to prove you were never the villain they quietly painted you to be. You wanted it to be understood. You wanted resolution. You wanted the last word. And every time you chose silence instead, it felt like swallowing fire. Healing wasn't soft. It wasn't candles and affirmations. It was violent in the quietest way. You had to cut attachments that still felt alive. You had to confront ego wounds that whispered, "Go back, fix it, win." You had to dismantle the identity that depended on being needed. You sat with discomfort long enough to realize it wouldn't kill you. You let the cravings pass, the validation hunger, the fantasies of confrontation. You watched your own patterns like an outsider, and that awareness hurt more than anything they did, because now you couldn't lie to yourself. You saw where you tolerated less than you deserved. You saw how you overextended to feel chosen. You saw the illusion clearly. This version of you is harder to access. It was built in isolation, in long nights, in conversations you never sent, in apologies you never received. And slowly, the chaos inside you began to quiet. The war didn't explode. It stabilized. There's a moment in every transformation where the door is still open. You could have gone back. Most people do. Not because it's healthy, but because it's familiar. Familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar growth. At least you know what to expect. You felt that pull, the late-night loneliness, the silence where validation used to live, the empty space beside you, where chaos once kept you distracted. It would have been easy to text them, easy to reconnect, easy to pretend nothing really changed. But you didn't. You endured the phase no one glamorizes. Nights without reassurance. Days rebuilding routines that had nothing to do with them. Emotional detox that felt like withdrawal. You sat in therapy sessions and told the truth. You journaled thoughts you were ashamed to admit. You built discipline in small, uncelebrated ways. This wasn't aesthetic healing. It was surgical. You cut habits. You removed access. You questioned your patterns. You learned to sit with yourself without reaching for noise. It was quiet work, repetitive, unseen. They thought time would weaken you. It sharpened you. Every day you didn't go back. Your standards recalibrated. Every boundary you kept reinforced something new inside you. You began to value peace over intensity, stability over drama, and without announcing it, without posting about it, without demanding recognition, you started operating differently. Healing was never meant to be a performance. It isn't inspirational quotes posted at midnight. It isn't dramatic declarations about cutting people off. It isn't spiritual bypassing disguised as enlightenment. Real healing is controlled emotional regulation. It's the ability to feel everything and still choose precision over impulse. You stopped reacting publicly. No more cryptic posts. No more indirect messages. No more emotional broadcasting. You let silence carry what your ego once needed to announce. You stopped explaining your boundaries. The old you would have written paragraphs trying to make your limits understandable, digestible, acceptable. The new you simply enforces them. No speeches. No debates. You stopped chasing closure from people who benefited from your confusion. That's power. Real healing reduces emotional leakage. You no longer spill your thoughts into rooms that haven't earned access. You don't vent to people who secretly enjoy your instability. You contain yourself. And that containment builds threshold. It strengthens but discernment. You notice tone shifts, inconsistencies, energy changes. You read between lines without confronting every detail. You don't need to expose everything you see. Awareness alone is enough. It increases selective access to you. Not everyone gets your depth anymore. Not everyone gets explanations. Not everyone gets the emotional version of you they once relied on. You're operating from somewhere deeper now. Not reactive, not eager, not hungry to be understood. This isn't revenge, but it feels like it to them because your absence exposed their expectations. They didn't miss your presence. They missed your availability, your tolerance, your willingness to absorb what they refused to carry. And now that you've tightened access, something shifts externally. They begin to feel what they once ignored. They notice as at first, it's subtle. You take longer to respond. Sometimes you don't respond at all. You're unavailable in ways that feel intentional, not accidental. Your calendar is fuller. Your energy's guarded. Your presence is no longer automatic. You're calmer now, not passive calm. When tension rises, you don't rush to smooth it over. When accusations surface, you don't scramble to defend yourself. You let words hang in the air. You let people sit with what they said, and that silence forces reflection. You don't seek their approval anymore. No subtle bids for validation. No checking their reactions to measure your worth. You speak because you mean it, not because you need reassurance. That's when it becomes unsettling. Your growth removed their control access. They can't provoke you the same way. They can't predict your emotional responses. They can't rely on your empathy to excuse their behavior. They were prepared for your anger, not your discipline. Anger would have been easier. Anger is loud. Anger can be dismissed. Anger can be blamed on instability. But discipline? Discipline is deliberate. It's harder to argue with someone who isn't reacting. You became unpredictable, not chaotic, but self-contained. Your reactions are no longer automatic. They're chosen. And when responses are chosen, they can't be manipulated. Dynamics built on your emotional accessibility begin to collapse. Conversations feel different. Power shifts quietly. The person who needed you to be reactive now has nothing to push against. And without saying a word, you change the structure of every interaction. Because your power is no longer volatile. It's stable. What you're becoming now is only the beginning. It might feel complete because the chaos has quieted. Because you're no longer bleeding energy in every direction. Because your reactions are measured and your standards are firm. But this is early stage transformation. You're not done evolving. The habits you're building now are compounding in ways you can't fully see yet. Emotional restraint is turning into emotional precision. Strategic communication is sharpening your influence. Physical discipline is reinforcing mental endurance. Intellectual depth is expanding how you interpret people, patterns, and power. Every small decision to stay controlled is stacking. Most people relapse into comfort. They heal just enough to stop hurting, then drift back into familiar dynamics. They mistake relief for growth. They choose easy over excellent. You didn't. You stayed with discomfort long enough to extract strength from it. You let it teach you, shape you, harden the parts that needed structure and soften the parts that needed awareness. That's rare. This version of you is more stable, but it's still refining. You're still observing yourself, still tightening standards, still removing what doesn't align. Growth hasn't made you loud. It's made you intentional, and intention scales. The more disciplined you become, the less you need to prove. The less you need to prove, the more selective you become. This isn't your peak, it's your foundation. And now your expansion is no longer reactive, it's controlled. Calm is a different kind of dominance. It isn't loud. It doesn't posture. It doesn't try to intimidate the room into submission. Real dominance is emotional neutrality under pressure. It's the ability to remain steady while others escalate. You don't need the last word anymore. You don't rehearse arguments in your head, preparing sharper comebacks. Silence is enough. Observation is enough. Walking away is enough. You don't need revenge. Not the dramatic kind, not the subtle kind. You don't need to see them regret losing you in order to validate your growth. Their realization is no longer your responsibility. That's power. You became harder to provoke. The old triggers don't land the same. The bait doesn't hook you. The manipulation doesn't confuse you. You see it for what it is, and instead of reacting, you adjust your access. And that shift is terrifying to people who relied on your reactions. Because if they can't move you emotionally, they can't control the dynamic. If they can't predict your response, they can't steer the outcome. Your calm removes their leverage. You're not suppressing emotion, you're mastering it. You feel everything. You just decide what deserves expression. That control changes how you carry yourself, how you speak, how you exit conversations, and slowly, without announcing it, your identity solidifies. You're no longer becoming powerful. You are. You didn't glow up for them. You didn't rebuild your body, your mind, your discipline just to make a point. You didn't wake up early, read deeper, train harder, or sit in uncomfortable self-reflection to win some silent competition. You did it because you were tired of being fragmented. But the result? It feels like revenge. Your discipline raised your standards. What you once tolerated now feels foreign. Conversations that used to stimulate you now feel shallow. Access that was once automatic is now restricted. You don't hand out your time the same way. You don't overextend to feel included. You don't shrink to maintain connection. And that shift elevated your presence. When you walk into a room, you're not seeking attention, but you're not invisible either. There's weight behind you now. Intentionality, a quiet certainty. Your peace highlights their chaos. Your detachment highlights their dependency. The very stability they underestimated became the mirror they didn't want to face. But you didn't attack. You didn't expose. You didn't retaliate. You simply evolved. It wasn't revenge, it was self-respect at full volume, expressed quietly. And the louder your self-respect becomes internally, the less explanation you owe externally. Now there's only one thing left to understand about who you've become. You don't hate them. Hate would mean you're still emotionally tied to the past. You're not. You don't obsess over what they're doing, who they're with, or whether they finally understand what they lost. You don't rehearse imaginary confrontations in the shower anymore. That chapter doesn't replay the same way. You built a version of yourself that doesn't require their recognition. Violation from them would feel redundant now. Apologies would feel informational, not transformational. Closure came from your own discipline, not their explanation. They can feel something changed, but they no longer have access to it. The emotional entry points are closed. The reactive version of you is unavailable. The part that once overextended has been replaced with something steadier. You didn't become colder, you became controlled, and control is power.